The absolute state of the UK. I think the leaders of that troubled island nation should just come out and say it. Okay, everyone, the massive migration into our island has not only transformed it socially, culturally, linguistically, and in just about every other way you can imagine, but it has forced us, or if they were more honest, they'd say we've conspired to also mutate our country into an authoritarian state where the holding of certain opinions needs to be banned lest some of the elements from our diverse communities, and we all know who we're talking about, may become riotously violent if someone should address the reality of the predicament that we have created for ourselves. Now, in order not to offend this community, we no longer can have freedom of speech, conscience, and opinion. Some thoughts and ideas need to be criminalized because they may offend others, and once offended, they're likely to resort to violence. And remember, diversity is our strength. At least they could stop pretending that there's anything akin to freedom of speech and conscience on those islands, and anyone who's still under the delusion that freedom still reigns in Britannia, well, given the events that have transpired over the last few days, it's clear to anyone with eyes to see that the government, police force, as well as the media will attempt to destroy anyone who questions the direction the country was set on by Tony Blair and his Labour government back in 1997. It's really not too hard to understand. The hyperdiversity that's been imported into the West is requiring more and more draconian speech laws in order to control the very different cultures being forced to share the same space. In the UK in particular, the massive clampdown on people's ability to disagree with and reject attacks on not only their communities but their rights is nothing short of sinister. Unfortunately, recently I was introduced to Owen Jones, a far-left media contributor, as he applauded the jailing of two members of the Britain First political party for their words. This man, along with much of the media establishment, has been complicit in not only warping the truth of news stories, but downright lying. The citizens of Great Britain are now very familiar with stories of children in towns across their country being abused and worse. And their agony and torture went on for decades while the police, local councils, and social services who knew that these crimes were taking place refused to stop them lest they be called racist. Thus, it does seem ironic that on the day this video is being produced, a story has been released that outlines what the paper calls Britain's worst ever child grooming scandal coming to light, if that's even possible at this point, with hundreds of young girls being raped, beaten, sold for sex, and some even murdered. As well as with all the other investigations, it's shown that the authorities failed to act for over 40 years, even though they knew. The story sheds some new light on the murder of one such victim, Lucy Lowe, who at 16 was burned alive along with her sister and mother by her 40-year-old abuser in 2000. However, when her murder was covered by the media in 2000, the abuse of the girl, which began when she was 13, was spoken of in such terms as girlfriend, jealous, possessive, relationship. Nothing about the grooming and abuse of a child by a 40-year-old man. Interestingly, his sentence for the three grisly murders was 18 years, and thus, Azhar Ali Mahmoud will be considered for release on parole in October 2019. And while these atrocities continue to happen in the UK, the authorities are constantly on the hunt to stop and shut down anyone who brings attention to these gifts that diversity keeps on giving. One man who has been branded an enemy of the state and is constantly being harassed by all manner of the British establishment is Tommy Robinson. And it is his association with a friend of mine, as well as being in the relationship with a thought criminal, that has seen my friend jailed for 3 days now in the UK without charge. I'm speaking, of course, of Brittany Pettibone and Martin Sellner, both of whom I know and speak with personally, and I know for a fact they represent no threat other than the threat that ideas pose to the UK, but were detained upon arrival in London, where Martin was set to give a speech at Speaker's Corner in London, ironically on the topic of freedom of speech. The reason for the Speaker's Corner venue was because an event Martin was scheduled to speak at had to be cancelled because of security risks posed by violent far-left groups like Antifa and their ilk. The reason authorities gave to Britney for her detention was that she was Sellner's girlfriend and that she intended to interview Mr. Robinson, who authorities characterized as an extremist and compared him with the KKK. Mr. Robinson is the former leader of the English Defence League and a staunch critic of the ideology of Islam and the political, social, and cultural manifestations and malevolence that it has brought to his country. Pettibone, an American, was imprisoned because she intended to speak with Tommy Robinson, a British national in the UK, and Sellner because his words at Speaker's Corner on the need for freedom of speech could have offended some. This is literally somebody being arrested and detained for pre-crime. And quickly jumping into action to make sure nobody hears anything that might offend them, the British authorities did not only just refuse them admittance or turn them around at the airport, no, they detained them for 3 days now, attempting obviously to use them as an example and send a message to those that might consider wrong-think on the topic of culturally transformative enrichment. Make no mistake, Pettibone and Sellner are both political prisoners. They are being held in the UK for their ideas and beliefs. This is what the UK has become, and it might as well just admit that freedom of belief and speech must be suppressed to hold the lid on the powder keg that vibrant diversity has created in that country. Don't get me wrong, I like the UK. I have familial ties to it. My grandfather fought in the Second World War to defend it. I'm sure he and his comrades, however, and those that died in that struggle are now rolling over in their graves. Shame on you, Britain, jailing people for their words and opinions. And understand this, unless something is done and done soon to reverse the rot, it's only going to get worse. Sorry for the load of black pills, but that's just the way it is this week. If you like this kind of material, please consider subscribing. Also follow me on the usual social media. Till next time.